Well, hello and good afternoon once again, and welcome to this month's CMD webinar. I'm Tim Ferguson and I work in the ministries team at the Baptist Union. And it's great to have you with us, whether you're watching this live or as a recording later on. Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to say a few things about what's coming up, and actually some of it's coming up very soon. So very immediately, there's another prayer broadcast tonight at 7 p.m. and you can get to that from the events page on the Baptist Together website. Lynn Green is going to be joined by Johnny Pozzo, the pastor of New Malden Baptist Church. And then tomorrow, in case you haven't picked this up, do look out for updates to our COVID-19 guidance. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation recently about the response to the announcements from the UK government. And again, some updates with some indications of what churches might do will be posted on the website tomorrow. It's a challenging time, I think, as we move from sort of clear do's and don'ts defined by government to a season with much more discretion and decision making for each church. I just want to say that even as we write the guidance from the Baptist Union's point of view, we're very much praying for churches in that process. But as for CMD webinars, there are none in August, so we've got a month off, but that's really only because we've got 2 in September. And they both promise to be really worth watching. Well, they all are, of course. But our first one is in September. That's a Wednesday, the 8th at 1 p.m. And I'm going to be, 1 p.m. I'm going to be joined by Nick Swanson. And we'll be talking about spiritual direction. Nick is a really experienced accompanier of other ministers and leaders. And he's got a passion that we all base our ministry on the best possible personal relationship with God. So we're going to explore how spiritual direction can strengthen that foundation for our ministry and how we can access it. So that's Wednesday, the 8th of September at 1. And then later in the month, on Wednesday, the 29th of September, we've got a key information webinar. The CMD framework asks each of us as ministers to hold an annual CMD audit. And we've suggested that happens around October, November time. And the idea of that audit is that we discuss and we plan our development and growth with a fellow minister. So the webinar, we're going to look at how we can make the most of that meeting. So we'll talk about practicalities, how best to set it up. But I'm going to be joined by some people who have already done a CMD audit. They did one last year, in fact, a bit ahead of the game, the early adopters. So please tune in to find out more as the time approaches for your first CMD audit. But so to today, and I'm really pleased to be joined by Sally Nelson and Andy Goodliff and Mike Peat. So welcome to all three of you. Great to have you with us. So Sally and Andy and Mike, they all happen to be on the committee for the Baptist Ministers Fellowship, but more importantly for this webinar, they all have involvement with a variety of Baptist journals. So I wonder whether we can go in turn, maybe Sally, Andy, Mike, and just say in a brief sentence what your day job is, as it were, and then what your particular involvement is in Baptist journals. So Sally.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm on the staff team at St Hild College, where I teach doctrine and pastoral studies and other things as well. And I'm also hub tutor for Northern Baptist, so I oversee the Baptist ministers in training who are studying with us. My involvement is with the Baptist Ministers Fellowship as the editor of the Baptist Ministers Journal. I also help on the board of JBTC, which is Andy's thing, and contribute to other Baptist journals. So that's my involvement.
So thank you. Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Goodliff. I'm the minister at Bellevue Baptist Church in Southend-on-Sea. And I'm one of the editors of the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context, a new journal that's come out in the last couple of years. And I also do some editing for Regents Reviews as well, a book review journal.
And Mike?
Hello, I'm Mike Peat. I'm a Baptist minister, but my day job now is to work as a university chaplain in the University of Bristol, where my official job title is Free Church Chaplain. So bringing that sort of non-conformist Christian presence into a multi-faith chaplaincy team. Primarily, I'm a member of the Baptist Ministers Fellowship Steering Group, secretary for them, but also that my main contribution here today is that I edit the book reviews section for the Baptist Ministers Journal and liaise and coordinate with people who are writing those reviews.
Okay, thank you. So it's great today. We've got somebody from Didcot specialist teams, somebody from one of the colleges, somebody church pastorate and in chaplaincy. Great diversity of contribution. So in a minute, we're going to hear more detail about a couple of those journals in particular. But first, while I've got you all on the screen, I'd just like to perhaps start with a general question. I mean, there are all sorts of theological resources out there, far more than we can ever hope to read or get around to reading. Why should we focus especially on Baptist resources? I wonder, well, I might point that one to Mike first of all. Why Baptist resources? What's relevant particularly about them for us?
Okay. Well, I think we do have some distinctive Baptist perspectives that can be brought to a whole variety of issues. I think particularly on the ground of the way in which we think about church decision making, that strong sense we have of people individually being in an active and direct relationship with Jesus, but also as communities. All of that can mean that we can often make distinctive contributions. I think one of the areas in which we sometimes make distinctive doctrinal contributions, for example, is the Baptist emphasis on covenant, on walking together in ways known and ways to be made known. And that finds its way of filtering into our theology and our practice. And also, I think if we are to equip ourselves to engage ecumenically or in multi-faith contexts, then it helps to have a strong sense of how our own heritage and roots can flow out and offer something that enriches the conversation in a wider Christian context or indeed a wider faith context. So I think looking at our own roots and seeing how that plays out in various practical and theological aspects of ministry can equip us for those kind of broader contexts.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, Sally, I don't know whether you've got anything you want to add to that?
I want to say something because Baptists are writing, and rather than things just sitting on a shelf or perhaps these days on a computer somewhere, it's a way of sharing our thinking and our reflecting and to a wider audience, so that it resources many more people than perhaps the person who might have marked an essay if you did it for an essay, or a little piece of work that you did either as an AM or perhaps part of your as part of your CMD. So it's about sharing our thinking, our reflection with a wider audience.
Yeah, do you think there's something there about honouring each other as well as we write and we contribute, honouring the work that others have done within our own family?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a great tradition of Baptist theology and Baptist thinking, and I guess these journals, which are seeking to continue that tradition and continue to offer that kind of thought for a new generation.
Yeah, great. Well, let's look at a couple of the journals in more detail. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hand over to Sally for a few minutes. He's going to introduce us in particular to the Baptist Ministers Journal. And then Andy's going to talk about the Journal of Baptist Ministry in Context and mention one or two others as well. So we're going to get out of the way and leave Sally to talk to us for a few moments.
Thank you. Baptist Ministers Journal, still, I've got a few issues here from the past year. So it still is available in print form, although the majority of our readers now have it delivered to them through their email box, which is obviously much more eco-friendly, but we still do print some. The Baptist Ministers Journal is over 100 years old. It started in 1907 when it was called the Fraternal, and it changed its name at some time in the 70s, I think that's right. And it's really interesting to look back at those days, actually. I had a look at issue 1 of the Fraternal in preparation for this talk, and I noticed that the Fraternal arose out of what was then called the Baptist Ministers Fraternal Union, which is the predecessor of the Baptist Ministers Fellowship that we have today. And their objectives were really the same as our objectives today, that we want to encourage community amongst ministers and those in Baptist leadership, because we're a bit broader these days. We don't confine it to ministers. We want to help one another, and that can be practically through benevolent fund, but also just awareness of one another's needs and resourcing needs. And also to encourage reading. I found this, forgive the sexist language, but in this first issue it says the Baptist minister must read if he is to lead. So I thought there's nothing new about CMD. They were into it in those days, and they set up reading circles on different subjects, as well as offering book reviews in the magazine. And perhaps another thing was to be slightly independent from the Baptist Union. So to offer ministers a safe space, if I could call it that, in which to have their own discussions and deliberations about things. And finally, there was this very strong sense that questions of ministry should be discussed by ministers and leaders. And we still think that today. So the Baptist Ministers' Journal very much offers you a space to discuss the things that are on your heart with other people doing a similar kind of job. So sometimes we get quite theological articles submitted, quite scholarly articles, but we're also open to theological reflections, both formal and informal. And we're open, we sometimes publish a really good sermon, sometimes we publish resources, sometimes it's just comment on what is going on, and that can generate sometimes a sequence of responsive articles. So it's very broad-based, but what I love about the Baptist Ministers' Journal is anybody who is in Baptist leadership can belong to the fellowship, receive the journal and write for the journal. And it's a very open and egalitarian thing in that way. And we just wanted to resource you. I also think it's a fantastic repository of social church information for those doing that kind of research. So I think we can offer that too, because you get a snapshot of the times when you read the articles. I think that's probably a good overview of what the journal does. We're going to have more discussion about accessing in a minute. So perhaps I could hand over to Andy to talk about JBTC.
Hi, thanks, Sally. The Journal of Baptist Theology in Context is a new journal. Its first editions only came out in 2020. We just published very recently the third edition earlier this year, and we hope to have another one by the end of 2021. The context or its history came out of Theology Live, which is a one-day conference for Baptists engaged in postgraduate work. And over the years, as people were beginning to offer papers to that, we began to feel, the small group of us who organise it, it would be good to have a journal outlet for that to come out, for those papers to be shared in a wider way. So the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context, it's an academic journal, but it's free, it's online. You just need to go to our website to access it. And it's really, I guess, it's aimed at pastor theologians who are perhaps engaged in postgraduate work, whether that's at master's level or or doctoral level, or those perhaps who are doing some really excellent work in undergrad level, or being able to share their work with a wider audience at that academic level. We recognise that for lots of our folk who are pastor theologians, in our ministers and others, it's not always easy, or feels a bit daunting perhaps to send an article off to one of the other major journals out there. And so the other thing about the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context, as well as it being written by Baptists, is it wanted to encourage and support people into academic writing and getting that academic work published. So we look to work with people from them submitting an article, work it up to a place where it's peer reviewed, that it can get out there in a wider way. And so it's about sharing the excellent work that many ministers and others are doing for masters or for doctorates, which, as I said in the first thing, that perhaps would otherwise sit on a shelf or on a computer and never get seen by anybody else. It's wanting to say that if people are doing that work, it'd be great to share it and to resource it with others in that way. And many of that is why is it called the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context? Well, often, because we're pastor theologians, it's our context that is driving our reflection. And so in our first few editions, we've had things looking at intergenerational formation. We've had things looking about art and mission, disability, women, modern slavery, things that are driving by a context for us to theologically reflect further and in that way. So that's the Journal of Baptist Theology and Context out there, and hopefully you might get a chance to have a look at it. I encourage you to. But also there are other resources out there. So there's the Journal of European Baptist Studies, which has just celebrated 20 years of being out there, which is based at IBTS in Amsterdam now. And that is basically bringing European Baptists reflecting again on their work to share that, and as well as including lots of UK people as well. And so for 20 years, they've been producing lots of interesting articles out there. And where it was once you had to buy it or pay for it, it's now all online for free. They have a dedicated website, but the IBTS also have set up what they call a heritage library, which has all the archive of that, and also other journals and other resources which they're putting together. So a fantastic thing from our European partners, which includes us, again, offering lots of interesting things to engage with. I should also mention the Baptist Quarterly, which is the journal of for the Baptist Historical Society. And those articles tend to be more historical, but not always. And again, I think it's about saying our past has got something to say into our present, into our future. And so lots of interesting work there. You do have to become a member to receive the Baptist Quarterly, which is about £30 a year to do that. And you can sign up through their website, the Baptist Historical Society website. But there is an archive for free up to 2000, which you can access through Theology on the Web, which might get mentioned later. And finally, let me just also mention Regents Reviews, which is an online book journal, which is organised by the Regent's Park College, Oxford, which is basically to share recent books coming out, whether that's theology in terms of doctrine or ethics, history, Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, practical theology. It's seeking to just offer some reviews, some of them short, some of them much longer, as a way of just helping people to discover what's out there that's new that might resource them in ministry. So there are some other things that you might want to engage with. I'm going to hand back to Tim.
Andy, Sally, thank you so much. You just get the sense listening to that there's this vast range of resources, which I suspect, and I'm speaking personally here as well, that many of us don't tap very often, and perhaps we ought to just be aware of this and looking into it more. Sally, I'd just love to pick up something that you said. I've just wrote it down here. That quote, a minister must read if he or she is to lead. Yeah. In this day when reading in itself, there are other options to reading, of course, and here's one of them, listening to a webinar. Do you still think that reading in itself is absolutely essential? Or do you just think that's a more general principle that's being hinted at there?
I think it's both. I mean, obviously in those times, reading was the way you transmitted information. So, obviously it is pertinent to the time. But it's interestingly what precedes it. The fraternal will recognise the fact that the true road to the promotion of ministerial well-being is the promotion of ministerial efficiency. The Baptist minister must read if he is to lead, so he must be helped to get books and guided where necessary in choosing and understanding them. So I think it does actually hint at something. I mean, it's in the language of its time, which we wouldn't use today, but I think it hints at something collaborative about, where can I find good resources to help me? And they use the term efficiency, but I think we'd be talking about well-being, and we'd be talking about passion and keeping up with changing context so that we don't fall behind.
Yeah, there's a whole thing there, isn't there, about what an efficient minister looks like. As you said, I think that's language which perhaps is changed into something else now. So we've got these journals. Again, even the ones we've mentioned would occupy vast amounts of your week if you wanted to read all of them in detail. So I'm just wondering, how do you think we should use these journals? There's no such thing as an average minister, but you're the pastor of the church, busy and so on and so forth. How can we use them wisely, and how do we engage with them? Are they a substitute for book reading? Do they complement that? Again, maybe I can go to you first, Mike, and for that one.
I think there are a variety of ways, probably depending on the rhythm you have. I mean, certainly for me as a chaplain, there are very different points of sort of busyness. So there's a rhythm based around term time. So often my catch-up reading time will be based around when it's not university time, which goes quiet. I'm not sort of it doesn't sort of create vast amounts of time for me to fill, but nevertheless, it does create more opportunities. So sometimes I will find in that time I can catch up with reading in journals. Sometimes I'll try the discipline, as I do sort of perhaps with a collection of essays in a book or something, of making a committed decision to read from that source, maybe on one morning in a week, sort of early morning. I might read an article that's come from one of the issues. I mean, I will admit I get behind that, so sometimes I'm catching up on 2, maybe even 3 issues of one of these journals by the time I'm reading them, but sometimes it's more manageable to say, well, let's really chew over one essay. And in terms of how I find it enriching, I think often when you go to the journals, you will read about things that you hadn't necessarily thought weren't necessarily on your sort of radar, wouldn't necessarily be amongst the pile of books that are on your desk, but can make connections for you that are new, you wouldn't necessarily have thought of. And sometimes I find it remarkable how things that may on the face of it, when you read the title, not look immediately relevant to the kind of work I'm doing, actually makes better connections and sparks off new ideas. It's almost like sometimes these articles I find are like a springboard into something that may not have been the author's intention and may not have been in my mind, but somehow in the coalition of the two, something new emerges, which does become very practical and helpful.
Yeah, something there about building that framework of thinking onto which things can be attached, even though the connection may not initially be apparent. And yeah. I mean, Andy, you are a church pastor, obviously, and you're having to read some of these journals because you're also editing them. But for your own learning, for your own development, how do you engage with them?
Well, I guess every week I'm reading. And for me, that's part of ministry, to be reading and engaging with the thoughts of others, whether it's all the way back to the early church, all the way up to today. And so for me, hopefully that resources and makes my ministry interesting. You'd have to ask my church that. But in terms of just shaping my preaching, but also in shaping how I might be leading the church or helping the church engage with mission, often it comes from I will say to my church, and they'll recognise this sentence. I was reading something the other day. And it's that which I think enlivens hopefully my ministry. And I guess what journals do is they're often much shorter. An article is whether in the BMJs is maybe 3,000 words, and some of our other journals they're kind of somewhere maybe 5,000 to 7,000 words. You can get through that fairly much more quickly than sometimes you can get through a whole book. And sometimes the great things about journals are the footnotes in the articles, which then may lead you, whether it's the article itself or what the article's been reading into, to help you take that idea further into whatever kind of way. So for me, the journals, I'm glad that they don't come out every week because it would be an editing nightmare, but that they come kind of a couple of times a year allows us just to have that moment of saying, this is something which may be of help to my ministry in some kind of way, or just my own theological development as well, my own spirituality in that way as well.
Yeah. And Sally, do you, with the BMJ and you're editing that, do you look for particular themes each time, or is it very much more a smorgasbord of articles that might not be related to one another?
It varies actually, Tim. So on the whole, I've been editor now for over 10 years. I can't really remember quite when I started. And I would say a lot of those years we would have had 1 out of the 4 issues that was themed. So many years there's been a single themed issue. So we've had something on chaplaincy, for instance, which Mike helped to convene. We had something on preaching, which Andy helped to convene. In the past, we've had an issue on disability. We've had issues on all manner of things like that. The one in January this year was on Brexit and the impact. It was specifically on Baptists and Brexit. So 4 writers exploring that from a Baptist perspective. So sometimes special issues are piggybacked onto something that's happening in the wider world. Sometimes they're thematic of interest to a certain group, but I don't do them too often because I'm aware that we have a very broad range of minister readers or leader readers.
Yeah.
And so if you do a special issue, it may completely switch off a percentage of the readership. If they think there's nothing in there for me and they're busy, they might not read it. So the majority of the issues contain a variety. Sometimes they're commissioned articles, sometimes they're just sent in to me, and I'll try and mix it up a bit so that we've got a variety of presentations in any one journal.
Yeah. So Mike, for the book reviews within the Baptist Ministers Journal, is it the same approach? If it's a themed copy, you would ask for book reviews around that theme, or do they again always stand completely separate?
No, they tend to be more separate than that. So often, what I try to do is have a range of books out there being reviewed that reflects the range of ministries as best I possibly can. But in terms of when they're published, it tends to be much more to do with when they're available, what space there might be available in the journal. And you'll get anything from 6 to 10 articles in the reviews section, all of between about 400 to 700 words.
Okay, yeah. So given that these are shared resources, that you're looking for theology and practical support from Baptist ministers, if we wanted to contribute to these as well as actually read them, how would we do that? If we got something, a bit of work we've done, we think, I'd really like to share this more broadly. What are the rules of engagement? What are the criteria? I guess we might have to take these, they might be separate. So perhaps BMJ first. Sally, maybe you could just talk about that.
Yes, I mean, just send it to me. My email address is, as it's inside the journal, it's, I don't know where I would say you would find it really, but perhaps we can add it to the information that follows this.
Yeah, I'll make a note.
But yes, just get in touch with me, and I'm very open to look at anything. I don't think anything is a silly contribution. That doesn't mean it will automatically be published, but we don't peer review for Baptist Ministers Journal because I do consider that the freedom of one minister speaking to other ministers is kind of key to the foundational principles of the organisation. So just send it in and I'll have a look. As Andy was correct, we tend to stick to around 3,000 words. It's a small format journal, and if the articles get too long, they just take up the whole journal, and that's not really appropriate when it's going out to people with such a range of interests. So sort of around 3,000 words is a good place to end at, and just get in touch with me and see. That's the thing to do.
And likewise, Mike, for the book review part of that.
Yeah, please do. My email address is always in the journal, and again, if it could be made available after this, that would be great as well. I'd love to hear from prospective reviewers. What I try to do whenever anybody gets in touch with you, I make sure first of all that they kind of understand how often the reviews come out, what sort of length they are, what kind of thing we're looking for in terms of content. And the content is really just to say what we want to hear about these books is ultimately how they might be helpful for ministry. But the other thing I'm also keen to do is match up prospective reviewers with the things they're interested in. So I will always ask you what sort of areas of ministry you're either passionate about or want to develop your learning in, so that actually hopefully you don't end up with a book that you kind of feel it's a thing on your tick list. You've got to get this review read, but actually it's something it's actually on a theme that you've wanted to explore. In fact, what I'll often ask reviewers to do is actually I will encourage people either to ask me if there's a book they would like to read and they think would be very helpful for ministry, to sound me out about it, because if I agree with them, which more often than not I do, I will try and source that book from them for publishers. So you may well be able to get a free review copy, which then both benefits your ministry but also allows you to write a review. I'm also very encouraging of people writing to me and say, look, I have just read this book because I was interested. It was related to something I was doing in my church. But actually, I think there's a wider audience who would benefit from it. Would you like a review on it? And again, I tend to find more often than not, though I reserve the right to say no. Usually, I don't feel the need to. Normally, I kind of pick up that person's enthusiasm because they've actually been reading it for a concrete purpose in ministry. It resonates already with what the review section is for. So I'm very open to having books suggested to me. I would like the reviews section to be, maybe I coordinate, but there's a sense of community around what's actually in there.
Yeah. So there's a slight difference, if I've heard this right, in that, Sally, you're looking for contributions from anyone who has something they feel they've written they want to share. Yeah. Whereas Mike, you're almost looking for a team of reviewers, those who are gifted in that ability to précis and explain a book. But
often people will be surprised by their gifts for reviewing after hopefully after a conversation with me.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're interested in either, get in touch with Sally and Mike. And yeah, we'll drop the details, email details, in the on the webpage for the recording of the webinar later on today. Andy, the journal, I assume that is peer reviewed, is it? The Journal of Baptist Ministry. So again, what happens there to contribute?
So I guess we're looking for articles that have an academic kind of rigor to them. And so that's a slight difference to the BMJ. So they'll be slightly longer. There'll be articles that have engaged with recent thinking around a topic which you're writing about. So it's got that up-to-dateness about it. So articles would come into us and then we would send it out for peer review. And the peer review basically means that it goes to a couple of people who make some comments on the essay to say, yes, this is good, or you could do some work here. And it's about helping people take an essay or something which is generally fairly good, but helping just develop up to that level of ability for it to be shared in that academic context. So the journal is aimed more probably at those who are engaged in master's work or doctoral work, or who have done a very, very good, probably third year undergrad maybe, and it's had a really, really good mark. And we're wanting for those kind of articles to come in and get shared in that kind of way. It's recognizing also that, there are out there amongst us are pastor theologians who continue to engage at an academic level in reflecting and wanting to give them an outlet to share their work as well.
Yeah. So that peer review process, it's not just to make sure that what is put out there is of the best quality, but it's actually beneficial to the person being reviewed because they're drawing in that wider analysis and hopefully refining their own thinking in it.
Yeah. And that can be, it can be daunting, and to apply to other journals, I've done it and I've been rejected, and there's something about having to put it out there. But hopefully the process that we're putting around is wanting to be a lot more supportive of people, especially as that's putting a toe in the water into this kind of writing and reflection. Yeah.
Okay. Sally, I know that there's one particular thing which I think runs annually, which is the Baptist Ministers Journal essay competition.
Yes.
So there's a particular way people contribute. Do you want to just explain what that is?
Yes, so we decided, I think we've run 4 of these now, so it happens once a year, and we advertise for entries for an essay competition. The essay should be 2,500 words with good footnotes, etc. And in March, the closing date is always the end of March, and we have some judges who kindly read them all, and we award a prize of £250. So it's worth having. It's not a peanuts prize at all. It's a good prize. And I have to say, this year we have had a fantastic number of expressions of interest and entries. So we've just finished that process, and the winning entry will be going into July. Which should be out any day soon. But that has been so pleasing because a lot of those entrants are students at our colleges or newly accredited ministers. It's often an essay that you might have written for your course or for NAMS, and maybe just tart it up a bit, send it in. And we've just seen some astonishingly good stuff. It's been great. And even if you don't win, we might still use the essay in a subsequent, so you still get a publication out of it, in other words. And it's a really good place to start with the Baptist Ministers Journal. If you've never published before and you're not quite sure how to go about it, and you've just got something to say, this is a pretty open door really to have a go and see what the process is like, and then you can move on to more exciting things like JBTC perhaps. But well, no, not more exciting, it's different. It's just different. This is ministers talking to ministers. Can I mention the of interest to you column, Tim?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So actually the bit of the journal that's possibly the most read is of interest to you. And now we no longer have a Baptist Union directory. This column, which is in every quarter, tells you where your colleagues and friends are moving. So if they've left a church and settled somewhere else, or if they've retired or that sort of thing, moved into a chaplaincy perhaps, of interest to you will tell you. And it is fairly comprehensive. We get information from the union and from the regional associations, and sometimes individuals sent it in. And our editor, Arden Gillies, edits that column. But it's a very well read part of the journal, and it keeps us up to date with what each other's doing.
Okay. So great. I love the essay competition. Share your thinking and get £250. What more could you ask for? Forgive me, did we cover this earlier? Did we say, do you have to be part of the fellowship in order to get the journal?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Right.
So you need to really join the fellowship at the moment in order to get the journal. But if you go to the website, I did see in comments someone had struggled to get on.
Yeah, that was my fault. It posted it in a poor form. It's corrected now. Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say, if you put Baptist Ministers Fellowship into Google, you'll get there. And Lee Greenwood has done a lot of work on it this year, so it's improving. And you can see there how to join. It's only £20 a year to join the fellowship. And as in the original document, it says here that the fraternal does not ask any wages. This is the magazine. All that it desires is that its ink and paper may be secure. That is, each minister will pay his shilling per annum for the magazine. And although it's £20 now, that is what it goes on. It goes on printing and postage. None of us have any sort of remuneration for what we do in the fellowship. So it's quite good value. You get 4 issues a year. Keep in touch with your colleagues and read some interesting stuff that will help your ministry.
And I know that this won't be suitable for everyone who might be watching, but can I encourage you, if you're a minister, to ask your church to pay that? That should be part of your development, which they should support. And one of the articles in the Baptist Together magazine that will be going out this autumn will be an encouragement to churches to help fund our CMD in various ways and support us in that, because churches should win from our development as much as we as ministers will win. Okay, can I also say, if you're watching, if you've got any comments or questions, please do drop them into the chat box on the YouTube channel, and we'll see if we can get around to addressing those. So please do make this a dialogue if we can. But another thing I want to ask you is about diversity. So do the contributors to these journals reflect some of the diversity of Baptist Together, thinking about age, gender, race? Again, maybe different answers to different journals. I don't know who wants to take that. Andy, perhaps, do you want to address that?
Hopefully, yes, in terms of age and gender. I think the Journal for Baptist Theology and Context is very new, but I think probably all the journals are struggling around race. And we would really encourage people of colour to just make their contributions to the BMJ, to the Journal of Baptist Theology and Context, to the Baptist Quarterly, in that kind of way. We recognise we need to do more there, and we would encourage them to people of colour to make those contributions. So we actually have a much richer editions and articles and theological reflection going on. But hopefully around gender and age, we do pretty well.
Okay, so I think there would be a broad appeal there for contributors, therefore, from particularly from different ethnic heritages and backgrounds would be great. Mike, how do we word this? Are there fringe benefits to engaging with these journals? So obviously we will learn. It's one of the first of the CMD habits is learning. But what else might we gain from engaging with them? And maybe I'm thinking of some of the other habits of attentiveness and accountability and connection.
I think certainly, just to expand the learning, I think from a book reviews perspective, you will pick up things. If you read book reviews, you may never read the books, but you then get to know what's out there for the times when you do need them. I think the journals can be of a huge benefit in terms of connection. What we tend to do, with people's permission, is make sure that authors of articles can be contacted. This is more sort of sadly with mine, but it does mean, for example, whenever I've contributed to the BMJ, I have had people make contact with me. Not sort of I've never been sort of intimidated by any feedback, but it's been much more a case of saying, I'd really like to kind of explore that aspect of what you said, or I've never thought of it in this way. How might I follow it through? So you are engaging then, you're connecting with a community of people who, when they write the articles, have done a bit of the background reading. So you may well see things that sort of you read in the article and you think, actually, that particular aspect I'd like to sort of explore a little bit further. What could I read to do that? What did you read when you were preparing this article? So you start a conversation, or it might be a case of saying, well, I was interested in that, but your context from which you were writing looks like this, mine looks like that. How might we kind of how might I translate from the one to the other? So there's opportunity there to engage at a level that allows things that are written in journals that just sort of sent out to a wide audience, then you can explore with authors how they might be tailored to more particular contexts.
Yeah, so a growing dialogue can emerge with other people who engage with it. Yeah. Anything else about fringe benefits, Sally or Andy, that you want to sort of observe?
I mean, I quite often find that an article in either JBTC, obviously it's new, but I've already made use of it, or in BMJ, it's really useful for reading lists, for essays for the students that I teach. And I think that is wonderful, because that is putting Baptists on that reading list. So it's not just Tom Wright and, you know, all the famous names, but actually we've got something to say from our nonconformist perspective that is worth reading. And I've found students have warmed very positively to that.
Yeah, I love that. So building a collective confidence in our own ability to theologize and
that's
write.
right.
And I guess I'd like to say that hopefully, you know, the BMJ comes out of the Baptist Ministers Fellowship. So it's part of a community. In a similar way that the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context is looking to develop a kind of community around that, which is just in its beginnings kind of things. So part of it is wanting to bring people together to theologically reflect together, I guess, in articles, but also hopefully to make that networking and connection, is to recognize that ministry can sometimes be quite lonely. And one of the ways is we get into a broader kind of community, you know. So for instance, I had someone say to me, "Oh, I'm doing some work here," to which I was able to respond, "Well, have you read this article? Or let me put you in contact with this person who's been doing a similar research." And, you know, those kind of connections can get made, and hopefully friendships can get made out of that as well. So hopefully there is a communal thing, which I think is very Baptist about these journals. And
I think the reality is that there are little theological reflective groups across the country, aren't there, that are made up of Baptists. So I know that there's one in Yorkshire, because I know I think Andy runs one. I know there's one down in the southwest. There's one in the northwest, and little groups of people who actually just want to talk theological reflection together on what they're doing in their churches and ministry, maybe more or less than the academic and practical scale. But that is a good thing for us to do, because we can so learn from each other and get excited again about what we're doing.
So there's a real opportunity, isn't there, to hit the CMD habit of connection as much as there is about learning in this, and making it a joint activity. That's fantastic. And something just worth mentioning in passing, we have, I think it was Andy made a reference to it, theologyontheweb.org.uk is an archive of journals. Rob Bradshaw's one of the librarians at Spurgeon's, and he diligently puts together this website with all the old archive material. So that's got historical copies going right back to the beginning, I think, of the BMJ and many other journals. So do have a look at that if you want to know some of the history. The most recent journals, of course, are not on there, I think, because it's a subscription model that they're put on after they've been a number of years after they've been published. But do have a look out for that if that's helpful.
It's usually up to a couple of years where it's the BMJ, so it's not far out of date.
Okay. So just a quick recap. So we've got the Baptist Ministers Journal, which is full of articles written by Baptist ministers for Baptist ministers primarily, although a bit broader than that, Baptist leadership perhaps. And you can get to that through membership of the Baptist Ministers Fellowship, which sounds like a great thing to belong to anyway. And then we've got the recently launched Journal of Baptist Ministry in Context, a more academic level, available free online. Just go to the website and you can see what's on there and engage with it. So as I encourage people, just again, if you're watching, do put some questions in. We haven't had any really yet, so it'd be lovely to have something to go at. But perhaps one more question for you guys as we do that. Can you give me a top pick, something that's perhaps been recently published, an article that you just thought that was really great and either was fantastically helpful or warmed your heart in some way? I don't know whether who wants to go first. Let's go Andy.
So in the BMJ, in the April edition, an article by Lee Greenwood called Rebel Heart, Rebel Traditions, which is reflecting on women in ministry. Just a really great, it came out of I think, an MTH essay or something, a master's level essay she was writing. So she, sharing it in a wider way, precisely what we want these journals to do. Just a really interesting reflection and history and context about women in ministry. And then in the Journal for Baptist Theology in Context, our most recent edition, there is a fantastic article by Steve Holmes on that perennial question of Baptist identity. Who are we? And Steve offers a new kind of suggestion around that, as well as kind of exploring some of the other ways that we might think about that question. So two things that I would really encourage people to get out there and read.
Yeah, and if I'm allowed to add my own, I thought that Stephen Holmes article was excellent as well. Really, really thought-provoking and helpful, very succinct and brilliantly put. Mike.
Great. Well, I could have pinched Andy's, but he got there first. But there are actually others that I also lighten up too. So looking at the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context, back in the second issue, in the November 2020 issue, I was particularly taken by Karen Case Green's article called Acts of the Imagination, which was looking at the way in which the visionary arts can be used, the visual arts can be used in a missionary way, and offered a very good, very nuanced and also very practical investigation of the way in which art can speak prophetically, drawing on Walter Brueggemann and others, Janet Martin-Soskis, on the way in which metaphor works, in order to show how actually some of the things we put out there visually, if they're very carefully thought through, can actually speak to sort of depths that go beyond, that reach beyond words. Not replacing words, but allowing some things, as she puts it, things to be said that couldn't otherwise be said through visual arts. From the BMJ, I'm going to be cheeky and sort of combine two in one, because what I thought was very helpful in the issue, it was January 2021, the issue on Brexit. If you read Joshua Searle's article alongside Peter Hatton's article, what you get is not two contrasting views on Brexit, but two different emphases. So very sort of nuanced way of thinking about looking at Brexit from different perspectives, bringing out different angles, bringing out differences of opinion, but not in polarized ways. So both are good articles, but reading them side by side, I think, says a lot about the way in which journals can bring out nuance and breadth without polarizing.
Thank you, Mike. And Sally.
Well, I'm afraid my best picks have already gone, so so I'll draw on my memory and just pick up a couple of other things that I've enjoyed. So in the Journal for Baptist Theology in Context, there was an article, I think in the first issue, about peacemaking in Rwanda, drawing on theories of the atonement, and I found that really helpful to read and an interesting application of what might seem to be quite abstract ideas to a real important practical situation. That was a cracking article. And I did like the Brexit issue. I thought there were four really interesting and contrasting perspectives in there. And I agree with Mike. I think the different angles that the authors took were fascinating. So I would recommend that. But also a year ago in April 2020, we had an article called COVID-19, a clerical medical discussion. And I think this is an example of a very different kind of article. It's a conversation right at the early start of the COVID pandemic between Lisa Kerry and Alan Kerry, who are at Croxley Green Baptist Church. So Lisa is the minister and Alan is a doctor, and they spoke about it from a ministry and a doctor point of view at that point. So it's a snapshot, and I think this is an interesting article that will perhaps be fascinating to read in 10 years' time when somebody's looking back and saying, how did COVID affect our ministry? How did COVID affect our churches?
Okay, thank you. So we've just got a question come from Karen Metcalf. Thank you, Karen. It says, where was the article again, the creative imagination one? I think that was the one you mentioned, Mike. That was from the Journal of... Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's the Journal of Baptist Theology in Context. It's issue 2. It's November 2020, and it's called Acts of the Imagination by Karen Case Green.
And on the website for free. There you go. Okay, fantastic. Good. Well, again, in the absence of any comments, I'm just going to ask maybe just a couple of final questions, unless anyone jumps in with comments on the chat box. We'll otherwise draw it to a close. I guess the elephant in the room may be, some people would think, in fact, they won't even be here watching this, to be honest, if they think this, but this is too cerebral. This is all about academia. And, just give us practical help. I stereotype, I realise, but how do you address that? Andy, clearly you are involved in academic work. How do you respond to that as a pastor?
Well, I think to be a minister these days is to be able to engage our minds with the minds of others in thinking through our faith. And that could be around apologetics. But I also want to talk about, I often talk about the difference that Christ makes, not just to prayer, to Bible reading, to those kind of spiritual things, but to everything, and, whether it's dementia or divorce, debt, depression. I once did a preaching series, all beginning with D's, around those issues, which is why it's in my head. But those kind of things. And I think these journals want to resource us to say the difference that Christ makes to everything. And hopefully through the editions, through the history, you get such a broad perspective which speaks into there. And I just want to refute the idea that all we need to hear is a call to action. I do think we need to hear a call to our minds as well. It's Romans 12, isn't it? The renewing of our minds. And these journals hopefully help renew our minds in ways that recognize the difference that Christ makes to everything.
Okay, thank you. That's a great answer. And Sally, one question I'd love to ask you. Do you have a vision for where the BMJ, Baptist Ministers Journal, might go from here? How would you like to see it develop? Are there any particular dreams or plans for it?
Yeah, well, I would love to increase the diversity. I think we do quite well on men and women and different theological perspectives and ages. But as Andy said, I would love more voices from different cultural perspectives, different ethnic backgrounds. Well, I suppose different cultural perspectives is difficult because we are mainly UK based, but there's no reason why we can't receive articles from overseas. And indeed, I've had a couple from Australia which have given us an interesting perspective, but it would be lovely to diversify that. And I think Mike and I have also been brewing the idea for a BMF lecture similar to the prize essay. We've had to postpone that because of COVID, but we're thinking about that, and that would be a dream. It would be published in the journal, and hopefully raise the profile. But I think what I really want to see, I just want to see people saying, this is for me, this journal, I'm in Baptist leadership, whether a minister or some other form of leadership. This is a place where I can go to say things, be resourced. That's my dream. It's something that brings us together. There's so many things that drive us apart.
Yeah. Okay.
And just to reiterate something I've already said, my real dream for all our journals is that things don't sit on a shelf or on a computer, but are shared more widely.
Yeah. So
it resources all of us. There's too many master's dissertations, doctoral essays, undergrad kind of essays, which no one ever gets to read. But we've given that time and energy, that thought to it, and many of them deserve to be read by others. And the journals are one way of sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see new people wanting to send in articles to both of the journals.
Mike, a final word. I think you want to add to that in terms of looking ahead.
Yes. Well, really to sort of echo a number of things that we said. I agree very much with what Andy said about the need to resource our minds. I think there are, when you look at for example, the book review section of the BMJ, you'll see often those books are written by reflective practitioners. So people who are actually thinking very thoughtfully and theologically, engaging in that process of theological reflection. But in order to do the day-to-day tasks, whether it's chaplaincy, mission, evangelism, preaching, all those kinds of topics covered, pastoral care. I only need to look, for example, at the BMJ issue that's sitting on my desk, and the first, it happens to be the Brexit one back from January, and the first book review that was published in that one was written by an Old Testament scholar, David Firth, in Bristol, the book that was reviewed, but he was looking at including the stranger, foreigners in the former prophet. So there's an Old Testament biblical commentator writing on these biblical texts, but very much with a view to issues that are very topical, very practical, and very pertinent today. So we really do try through the articles and through the reviews to encourage people to see those connections, so that acting isn't just impulse acting, but acting well on the basis of careful theological thought. Another note from me to echo what's been said: I would love to see a much broader ethnic mix, particularly amongst the book reviewers, but mix in terms of age. I think there is sometimes the assumption that people who are sort of into early retirement have the time to read and review books, but actually, if the message we want to convey about book reviewing being part and parcel of CMD gets through, then hopefully that will broaden the age range. Please don't leave the book review section subject to my limited understanding. Make sure that I have my own. I hear about things that I wouldn't necessarily otherwise have heard about, so that you're not stuck with my limitations.
Yeah, and perhaps it's incumbent on all of us to, if we know of those who are writing and thinking who are from BAME backgrounds, then we encourage them to put that work in. I see there's Karen has again commented, says perhaps you could recommend different articles as part of the emails that come from the Baptist Union, both nationally and locally. Thank you, Karen. I'll take that on board because I send that email out. So I'll have to think maybe the top picks ought to be a regular feature of those emails. So great. I'm persuaded. Can I just say, I've loved this. I think this has been very, very informative and very inspiring to help us to think about looking at the resources that are out there within our own family. So thank you so much, each of you, for contributing. Really appreciate that. We tend to end these webinars with a prayer, and Mike, I know that you agreed just to perhaps pray for us in our learning, our reading, certainly, and our writing.
Happy to do that, Tim. Thank you. Let's pray together. Loving God, we come to you in confidence and hope, knowing that your Spirit fills our hearts and our minds, that it is by your Spirit that we can think and we can act, and that it is your Spirit that enables us to make connections and learn and grow and recognize our dependence on each other. And we pray that those aspects of your Spirit's enabling may have been heard in what we've discussed today, that what is offered through these various journals, through the scholarship, through the reading, through the reviewing, may be another way in which we offer our worship to you, another way in which you speak to us and through us. So we ask that what has been shared today may be taken and used for your kingdom's sake, that it may empower us, that we may be more faithful as disciples of you. Help us to learn and to grow. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Sally. So just as we close, a quick reminder for you, no CMD webinar in August, but 8th of September, I'll be back with Nick Swanson from Western Baptist Church. Nick's a spiritual director, as well as many other things, and we're going to be looking at that topic of spiritual direction. But otherwise, I think it's just for me to say, God bless you and goodbye.